welcome to my presentation. First of all, I'm going to apologise if I come through a little croaky. I'm still suffering from a bit of a head cold, so if I burst into a cough, I promise I'll mute so I don't deafen you all. Okay, what I wanted to talk about is something that I've been quite passionate about for a number of years now, which is the technology challenges that adult learners have when they come back to learning after being away from traditional learning for a while. So what I'm going to talk about is some of the challenges that that learners, particularly adult learners, might come across as they go through their learning journey, and some of the things that, as educators, of what you can do that can actually assist some of these adult learners that struggle with the technology and when they start learning. So one of the first things that I identified when I first started teaching adult learners about 8 years ago was that you can't put everyone into the same boat. Everybody is very different, and I learned very, very quickly that the way that adults learn is very, very different to the way we traditionally would have learned when we were at school, for example. I went and did a bit of research on some statistics, and although these are slightly older, they don't actually change that much, in the sense that 60% of our learners back in 2014 were over the age of 25. That's not a bad thing, but if you think, that's probably been about 7 or 8 years since they've actually been at school, and the way people learn at school 7 or 8 years ago is very, very different to the way we learn now. This was another interesting statistic, was that 21 million mobile handset subscribers in Australia. That's not bad, considering we've only got a population of, what is it, 27 million or something. So we have a lot of adult learners out there that have these devices in their hand to learn, but not quite sure whether they know how to use them or not, particularly when it comes to challenging them. Oh, that works. I wanted to talk about the technology that we have and the technology that we have now, and I want to take into consideration someone that's 35 years old. So I'm going to use that as a bit of an example. So let's consider that they left school 17 years ago, so that would have been 2000. Now, I don't know the ages of you guys that are out there at the moment, but if you think about what we had in 2000, we had Nokia 7110s. I don't know if anyone remembers those, but they were the green ones, and it had a scroll wheel in the middle. And you could actually start scrolling, and you could actually start getting onto this thing called the web. We had Internet Explorer 5.5 and Netscape Navigator. If you're old enough to remember Netscape Navigator, you're doing really, really well. Windows ME and Windows CE. So it was the start of when the tablets came in, but they were so ridiculously expensive that no one could afford one. Netscape Composer, thanks Scott. Mac OS 9, and text messaging had just started to come into effect. They had pages around about that time as well. I know, because my second child was born in 2001, and before that my son was born in 94, and they were just using pages. Skip forward now 17 years, and we've now got YouTube, and we've got Wikipedia, and access to just about anything from any phone, which was just unthinkable back in 2000. 24/7 connectivity, many, many more browsers that are much, much better than Internet Explorer. Chrome, Firefox, of course, we've got Moodle now as well, and all these different LMSs. Plus there's so much more that's out there. So looking at what we already know about adult learners and some of the struggles that they have, the adult learners are very less open-minded people. They know what they want, and if they want to learn and they want to do something, they're going to go and do it. There's a reason of why they want to do it. They're very, very self-directed and very, very goal-orientated. There has to be something at the end of what they're learning that's going to be beneficial for them, whether it be through financial or just personal goals, but there has to be something that's beneficial to them. They're slower learners, yet they're more integrated knowledge within what they're learning. So they have these life experiences. Their learning styles are all very, very different, and they're probably a little bit more articulate in how they want to learn. But they're much more motivated. So when we're going to school, it's going to school because we're forced to go to school. When we're adults and we want to learn, that's because we're motivated to learn. It might be for a new job, for a career change or something. But then there's this thing that gets in the way that I like to call multi-level responsibilities, brackets, family, life, a job. All these different things get in the way of someone wanting to learn and how they learn. And you have to juggle that with an adult learner. And when you start bringing technology into it too, you do start to run into all these different issues that they're going to face. So now I'm going to take you through some of the challenges. I've got 5 challenges that I've tried to group together of what challenges adult learners will have or what they're going to face. And the first one I believe that they're going to face is what I call bias. To put this into context, excuse me, I'm betting that you've all heard of the Android versus Apple versus Windows war. I'm very much an Apple person, and I really do give it to the Android users, and they give it back to me as well. So there is a certain bias towards certain technologies. And when it comes to us as educators designing and developing resources for students, we have to ensure that it's going to work seamlessly across every device. You've got to think that these adult learners only know one device. You won't get them to switching between different devices as well. It's the same when it comes to using Windows or using Mac. They're either one or the other. They're very biased towards it. So you need to be aware of everything as an educator to make sure that you can accommodate everything that they're doing. And in every different type of what we design is what we call platform agnostic. So it's going to work, and you don't discriminate or segregate against any learners. The other one is literacy. And if anyone knows what that picture is in the background, you're doing very, very well. If you had one when you were growing up, and you've still got it, it's probably worth a fortune. Now, when I talk about digital literacy, I want to give you a couple of examples that might explain it a little bit better. I was delivering an iPad 101 course to some older adult learners. And one of the first things that someone came up to me and said, "Where do you put the CD?" Now, you might laugh, but we're giving them an iPad, and their literacy of computers is that everything's on a CD. And of course, iPads don't have a CD player. So I had to explain to them of how it works. And they didn't quite grasp the concept of the cloud. You know, they actually think that there's a computer stuck up in the cloud. So it was that literacy side of things that they didn't quite understand. Another example was we were talking about Word and Microsoft Word and how you can get it. And I just said to the lady, I said, "Well, why don't you just go and Google Office 365? Now, to you and I, that's pretty simple. We open up a browser, we get into Google, and we type in Office 365. She came back to me later on and said, Google doesn't make Office 365. I couldn't find it. And that really got me thinking, is you have to be very, very careful about what you say. We might take it for granted that, yeah, just Google Office 365 or Google this. But they didn't quite get it. The literacy side of it, they didn't quite understand that Google Office 365 means several different things. So we have to be very cautious about what we say. Another one, which is a classic, is a lot of older people seem to think that they're getting a really, really good computer when they say, "Oh, I've got 500 gig of memory." I've yet to see a computer that has 500 gig of memory. I know they have 500 gig storage and hard drive, but not 500 gig of memory. And that comes back to the literacy as well. And I don't know if you've got any older friends, but have you ever tried to see them push an icon through a touch phone? You have to tell them that you don't really need to touch it that hard to push it through. So all this comes down to the digital literacy side of things. which takes me into experience and exposure. So just because someone's been around for a rapid change in technology doesn't actually mean that they've been, they have the exposure or the experience to the technology. I actually posted this on Facebook the other day. I've made some little cards up, which I'm posting, and it was interesting. My background is an ex-Navy, and a fellow colleague that I was in the Navy with actually said to me that that he saw this happen when we changed ships and we went from an older ship to a newer ship, and the technology jump was so big that these guys didn't have the exposure to the new technology. So there was a big jump in that. So that was really interesting to hear that. Sorry, Lynn, you've just asked where the Windows snipping tool is on a Mac. It isn't. It is Command Shift 4 or Command Shift 3. There you go. I'll get that out of the way. So the rapid change in technology is yeah. I'm going to take my mother for example. So my mum's mid-70s. My younger brother and myself, we're the Mac people, and Mum wanted a computer, so we bought her a Mac. So we're actually able to assist her and dial in and help her and all that kind of stuff. And she slowly got used to it, and she got onto Facebook because she realised that she was the only way she was going to talk to her grandkids was if she actually got onto Facebook. So she got on there and everything. But if I send her an email now and say I'll just open the PDF, she's not going to know what an actual PDF is. She'll just look at me with a very blank Irish look on her face. This one that I want to talk about is probably one of the biggest ones, and that's fear, or digital fear, as I want to call it. Because we've had such a rapid increase in technology, and the storage of personal details on devices and the cloud and everything else. There's a lot of adults out there that are actually scared to play with technology. So if a warning comes up, they're scared that something's going to happen. They're fearful if they like something on Facebook because there's all this media scanning and everything else that happens within the media. Adults just suddenly get scared, and this really does affect their learning, because if we're delivering an online course and they have to upload a Word document into Moodle, they don't know where it's going. They don't know what's happening. So there's a genuine fear that something's going to happen, or if they like something, I've got it written down here, they're likely to lose all of our savings to a Nigerian farmer that has a donkey that needs an important operation on its eyes. They just don't know what is happening. So there is a genuine fear. Older adult learners, so we're now talking towards the mid-50s and 60s, are sucked into scams as well. As horrible as it sounds, that's the naivety and the fear of the internet. So this really can affect their learning, particularly if they're going to go and do an online course. So the other thing, and I've got a note here, is if you ever wanted to know what your mum's PIN code is to a phone, I'm betting it's probably her year of birth. That's because they don't think outside. They go, oh, I'll just put in something that I remember. And I guess that comes down to a little bit of fear as well, is trying to remember what it is. And if they can't get back into their phone, what's going to happen? So there is, in my belief, this is probably one of the biggest ones, is there's this genuine fear of technology. And there's social and culture. I'm trying to shrink that down, but there we go. So social and culture is what the environment that the people have been brought up in, the adults that they've brought up in. I'm not trying to stereotype or be discriminatory in any way, but depending on the social economic environment that the adult has grown up in will affect the way that they're actually going to be able to learn online. It can sometimes, I have heard someone say when I've talked to them about this, that they might call this the digital divide. So those in a lower socioeconomic would not necessarily have access to all the technology that we have access to these days. And so they're actually, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a detriment to them. They're not given as many benefits because they haven't actually been exposed to all the different technologies because they just haven't been able to afford it. So as educators, and we're all educators in some form, how can we as educators actually bridge this gap? And particularly with the adult learners that have these digital challenges. So, excuse me. The first thing I want to talk about is that you need to know your stuff. Excuse me. Glass of water. Is you can't help someone if you don't know yourself. So as an educator, you really need to have a pretty good grasp on all types of technology. You need to be able to understand what's happening. Don't be scared to try new things and try new software. What's the worst that can happen? Brackets, make sure you back everything up. And it's a valuable lesson. You're going to learn that valuable lesson. So know your stuff, get to know, do your research, get into RSS feeds, get into blogs, follow up and keep up with technology. If you're not on Twitter, get onto Twitter. You don't have to tweet anything, just basically follow everything and know what's going on in the world. If they can't get you within 140 characters, it's not actually worth looking at. So keep up with technology and keep up with what's going on. iMoots and Moodle-moots, etc. They're great ways to keep up with technology. Identify, ask the questions of your students and find out what they know. So you can't always assume that the student knows what's going on. Well, that's pretty obvious. And then ask some questions, probe a little bit, saying, oh, can I email you the link? And based on their response, they might actually, you'll start to understand what their level of technology is. Ask them if they've searched Google for anything and gauge their response. It'll give you a really, really, really good insight into what their level is, and then you can accommodate your teaching style and change it a little bit to help those, because these are the ones that are going to struggle a little bit. All right, you need to bring it down a little bit. Okay, so drop the jargon. I'm very, very good at just spinning out web development jargon and anything else. And you just tend to baffle them. So once you've identified what the digital literacy level is of your students, you'll know the level of conversation that you'll need to have with them. Admittedly, this is going to be very, very different across all your students, but you will find a way to do it. I've used what I like to call a bucket analogy, and I'm finding that the bucket analogy actually works really, really well across a lot of things. And if you take, for example, a folder structure, if you're trying to explain a folder structure to an older adult and they're not quite grasping it, give them the concept of a big bucket. That's one folder, and then you put another bucket in, and then another bucket, and multiple buckets. And using that visual aid, so to speak, it actually, I found that that's been the best analogy to try and teach people different things. I've used it for how to use arrays and how to use variables in programming, and it actually seems to work quite well. It has worked quite well for me, and it tends to bring things down a little bit so people can understand what's actually going on. And you've got to provide resources. Once again, be it electronic or not. Sometimes you might want to provide them in print, and that would all depend on your resources, I guess. But if you've got them in print, you can then mail them out to them. Electronically is obviously the best way. Don't give a student more than what they can handle, or you will lose them. If you give them way too much to begin with, you'll just drown them, because you've already identified the student's strengths. You want to play to those strengths. Okay, so you want to be able to play to, once you find out what their digital literacy is, find out what their fears are, you can actually play to that. And once you've got the student on board, you'd be surprised how quickly they'll actually take off. And a big one, I shouldn't have to tell you guys this, you just don't want to give up on your students. I was delivering web development diploma to about 80 students online. They were all online students from around Australia. Very, very challenging for me, but never ever give up on them. Some of them have gone on to university now. Some of them are now in the web industry. Some of them are in the gaming industry. But you know that your knowledge is going to be empowered onto them. So just don't give up on them, because I know that they will want to give up. And I'm going to give you an example in a minute. They do want to give up. So you as the educator obviously don't want to give up. And that's very, very important for adult learners. So I want to give you a bit of a real world example of what actually happened. And this was probably about 2 years ago. And my partner at the time decided that she would do a diploma in business management. She worked in children's services. She was a childcare group leader, and she needed this to be able to progress her career on to get into the more managerial side of things. So I worked for an RTO that delivered it, and she decided that she would investigate this and have a look at it, and she did. And because I worked for the same RTO, I said, I'm not going to get involved in this. I'm just going to sit back and I'm just going to watch. Brackets, I actually want to see how you behave when you do this. So there was a bit of analysis going on my side. So she enrolled, she got accepted, everything went through. Within about 3 to 4 days, a lovely courier came along and dropped off a big package and a backpack and all the books and everything else, all the different forms she needed to fill out. So she filled out all the forms and got them straight into it. And then she got into the student portal, so which at that time was Moodle, and she got into Moodle. She had a look at what she was doing, had a look at the first couple of units, and I watched her as she went into the first one, and she went straight to the assessment and downloaded the assessment and started working on the assessment. And that was a real shock for me, because here I was thinking, well, no, you're going to go through all the resources that my team have developed, and you're going to learn, and you're going to do this, and then you'll go into the assessment. But that's not what happened. She went straight to the assessment. She didn't even unwrap the textbook that came with the course. She went straight into it. And this was a real eye-opener for me. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that that's actually probably what happens in real life, is they go straight to the assessment. Why would you bother going to any of the learning resources? And then because it's online, there is actually now, but there was no way of tracking her learning. So there was no way whether you actually knew she was doing any learning. Nowadays, you can use the new X API, which is called an Experience API, which is the next level up from SCORM, to actually start tracking the students' learning and being able to find out where they're struggling. But that's another story for another day. So she never ended up making the course. Admittedly, she did get a lot of support from her tutors, but she did struggle. We later discovered that that was not her way of learning. Her way of learning is in a classroom environment. That's what works for her. Online learning requires a lot of discipline, a lot of support, a lot of self-discipline. And as much as she tried, she never went through with it. But for me, yeah, it was an absolute. It gobsmacked me, but it then again made me realise that that's pretty much how a lot of people will go. And there's no way, like I said, it's online. How can you track? Yes, you have assessments that are due on particular days, but how do you know that the student's actually learning? Whereas in a classroom, it's very, very different. So that was very interesting for me, and it really changed my outlook on a lot of things. And having a technical background, that's where I started to get involved with actually learning analytics and starting to understand how you can track how students actually learn. So that's what I kind of do at the moment. And it all stems from this, and stemming and understanding how an adult learner actually learns, which is very, very different to the way a high school student of today would learn. So that was pretty much what I wanted to talk about. I know it's quite short, actually. I've only gone for half an hour. But yeah, these are my little concepts that I've come up with. There is a link on the course out to my website where you can get some of these little cards, digital cards that I've created with summaries of what adult learners do. And there's also a book that I've written based on these concepts as well, called Discovering Adult Education with Technology, and it covers a lot of what I actually spoke about tonight. So yeah, that's it. Has anybody got any questions?
Okay, let's open it up to questions from the floor. And if you have a microphone, you can either ask on the microphone or you can ask in the chat. And you know what? I'm going to take the facilitator's prerogative. I want to ask the first question, actually, if you don't mind. So, Julian, I found this really interesting, especially since it's been a while since I've been teaching. But when I was teaching, I actually dealt with the other end of the spectrum, and with a lot of I'd call them young adults, I suppose. And I just thought it was really interesting, the contrast of the difference, especially talking about some of the digital native, the millennials, their approach to technology versus a older adult's approach to technology. I'm just wondering if you can comment on the contrast between that, and specifically, what would you give for advice if you were trying to design a course that was like a be-all, end-all? You had participants from both ends of the spectrum. Could you give any hints to that?
Good question. Thanks, Scott. It's very very vast. When being a father of a 22-year-old and a 16-year-old, I do see them going through. So they're the millenniums, I guess, and their grasp on technology is very different. How could you design a course to do that? That's a very good question. What I guess some of the things that I would consider is conditional activities. So don't let a student progress past something until they've actually completed something. So this in itself is a way of tracking learning. So using the conditional activities within Moodle. So using the paging as well within Moodle. And if you have the ability to track through XAPI, that would give you a better understanding of how your students are learning and using those analytics to be able to improve the course. The actual user experience and user interface is governed quite greatly by Moodle, I suppose, and what your institute is designed and how it's designed. But if you can use some sort of conditional activity in there, I think that probably covers most of the range of learners, I think. Yeah.
Well, great answer. Sorry, I didn't mean to ask you the $64,000 question. I was curious of your insights there.
It's a very good question.
Yeah. Any other comments, questions? Please don't be afraid to speak up. So we're getting some thank yous.
Yeah.
But,
you're welcome.
Yeah, well, it was a very good presentation. I really, I think everybody can see that, but I've never actually seen it spelled out for me like that. The the challenges, the fears, and the challenges that the adult learners would face.
Yeah. I think it goes a lot unnoticed out there, and there's a lot of assumptions that people make. And on the learner's behalf too, I think there's some assumptions that they can just go in there and go, oh, this will be a breeze, and it's not. Because the way that they learned in their previous life, be it in school or higher ed, it's very, very different to when they go in to try and do their online course for the first time.
Mm. And with some of the capabilities coming out, I mean, it's going to diverge even more when we start talking about in the future doing location-aware education and a lot more mobile apps and so forth. It's going to totally change.
Oh, absolutely, and that presents even more challenges for the educators as well. Is using that technology. I know we were looking at augmented reality and VR at one point. Yes. However, how do you get that out to distant learners? It's very, if I was to send it out to someone in Longreach, which is 3,000 kilometers from Brisbane, how does that all work? So there's some big challenges for both learners and educators, I think.
Yeah, challenges, but challenges are good things sometimes.
Absolutely, yeah, they keep us on our toes.
Exactly.
All right.
Okay. So thank you very much, Julian. I really appreciate that you came and spoke to us here at iMoot today. Julian is a good friend of mine. We go back sort of to our TAFE days. And it's always a good to get together with you either at Moots in person or on iMoot. So thank you very much for your presentation today.
No worries. Thank you, Scott. Thanks everyone for attending. I appreciate it.